Detective Carla Reyes of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office had seen a lot of things cross her desk in 18 years. Plea agreements, autopsy supplements, photographs she still saw when she closed her eyes. But she had never seen anything quite like this. 4 handwritten pages, cramped and sloping, mailed from a correctional facility in Arizona. She read the first paragraph standing at her desk. Then she sat down. Then she read it again. By the 3rd line, she knew. The letter was a confession. A full, unprompted, detailed confession to a crime that had gone unanswered for nearly 2 decades. A crime that had taken a woman named Patrice Delgado from her family on a warm October night in 2001 and left the town of Sparks, Nevada, with a wound it never quite healed. The man who wrote the letter had been living freely for 11 years after Patrice disappeared. He had attended community barbecues. He had watched the news coverage. He had, by all accounts that would later emerge, slept without much difficulty. Detective Reyes set the letter flat on her desk. She looked at the name at the bottom of the last page, and then she made the phone call that Patrice Delgado's mother had been waiting 18 years to receive. But to understand what that call meant, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to Sparks, Nevada, in the fall of 2001. You have to understand what was lost before you can understand what it meant to finally find it. Sparks sits just east of Reno, separated from it by a stretch of highway that, in 2001, still felt like genuine distance. It was the kind of town that prided itself on not being Reno. Smaller, quieter, more neighborly. The sort of place where you could still find a diner that had been run by the same family for 30 years, and where the high school football games drew half the zip code on Friday nights. The population hovered around 70,000, but the community operated more like something half that size. People recognized each other at the grocery store. They knew each other's cars. Patrice Delgado had lived in Sparks her whole life. She was 34 years old in the fall of 2001, and she had the kind of presence that filled a room without demanding it. She worked as a registered nurse at St. Mary's Regional Medical Center in Reno, driving the same 15-mile commute she had driven for 7 years, listening to the same classic country radio station every morning. Her colleagues on the overnight floor called her Patty. Her mother called her Tracy. Her 8-year-old daughter, Maya, called her Mom in a voice that, by all accounts, could melt anything. She was raising Maya mostly on her own by 2001. A divorce had been finalized the year before. Quiet, undramatic, the kind of separation that both people saw coming. She didn't talk about it much. What she talked about was Maya's reading level, which was 2 grades ahead. She talked about the garden she was slowly losing a battle with in her backyard. She talked about a trip she and her mother were planning to San Diego the following spring. The first real vacation either of them had taken in years. She had a habit of double-checking the lock on her front door before she left the house. Her mother, Gloria, would later say it was something Patrice had done since she was a teenager, would get to the end of the driveway and turn around, just to check, something her own mother used to find endearing and mildly exasperating in equal measure. The fall of 2001 was a tender and unsettled time across the whole country. September 11th had happened just weeks before, and small towns like Sparks were still sitting with a kind of lowered quiet that didn't have a name. People were more careful, more close to home. It was in that atmosphere, watchful, slightly wounded, leaning toward each other, that Patrice Delgado worked her last shift on the night of October 14th, 2001, and drove home through the dark. Her car was found the next morning, parked in her driveway. Unlocked, the driver's side door slightly open. Patrice was gone. At 6:47 in the morning on October 15th, Gloria Delgado called her daughter's work number from the rotary phone in her kitchen. Patrice had been due to pick up Maya at 7:30 for school. When the hospital told Gloria that Patrice had clocked out at 3:15 a.m. and left the building, Gloria set the phone down in a careful way that her hands did not match and walked outside. The car was in the driveway. She could see it from the sidewalk. The door was slightly open, which was wrong, because Patrice never left a door open. Gloria stood there for a moment on the sidewalk in the October morning, the desert air already carrying its particular smell of sage and cooling asphalt, and felt something shift inside her that she would not be able to name for years. She called the Sparks Police Department at 6:53 a.m. Officers arrived within 20 minutes. The initial check of the residence showed nothing disturbed inside. Dishes in the drying rack, Maya's backpack hung by the door, a half-finished glass of water on the kitchen counter. Patrice's purse was on the dining table. Her wallet was inside it. Her nursing badge was clipped to the strap. There was no note. There was no sign of a struggle. The front door lock showed no damage. The back door was locked from the inside. What there was, one item missing. Her cell phone. A Nokia brick model that Patrice carried in the front pocket of her scrubs. It was not in the house. It was not in the car. It was not, as far as anyone could determine, anywhere at all. At 8:34 a.m., her phone pinged a cell tower near the Truckee River, 3 miles east of the house. Then it went silent. By noon that day, Sparks Police had opened a missing persons investigation. By the following morning, volunteers were walking the riverbank. By the end of that week, a search that would span the next 3 months had begun, covering 47 square miles of high desert terrain between Sparks and the Nevada-California border. Ground teams, helicopters, search and rescue dogs working in the cold, dry air. The kind of coordinated effort that towns mount when they believe something terrible has happened and cannot accept that they will not find the answer. They found nothing. The lead investigator assigned to the case was a detective named Roy Kimura. He was 41, a Sparks native, had joined the department straight out of college, and worked his way to detective in 11 years. His colleagues described him as methodical. His family described him as someone who brought his work home in his head and kept it there. He had worked missing persons before. He had worked one homicide. He knew the difference between a case that had an answer and a case that refused to give one. The Delgado case, from the beginning, felt like the second kind. In the early weeks, Kimura developed 3 persons of interest. The first was Patrice's ex-husband, David Delgado, a general contractor who had relocated to Henderson after the divorce. He cooperated fully with every request, provided a verified alibi for the night of October 14th, and passed 2 polygraph examinations. He was never charged. The second was a co-worker, a male nursing aide at St. Mary's, who had reportedly made comments that made Patrice uncomfortable earlier that summer. Kimura pulled his phone records, interviewed him twice. The man had been in Sacramento from October 12th through the 17th, a fact confirmed by hotel records and a receipt from a medical licensing conference. Another door closed. The third person of interest was a neighbor, a man named Carl Weatherby, who lived 4 houses down from Patrice on Oleander Drive, and who several neighbors recalled seeing outside his garage at unusual hours. Kimura spent 6 weeks on Weatherby, requested a search warrant for his property that a judge declined to sign on grounds of insufficient probable cause. Weatherby declined to be interviewed without an attorney, and then, 3 months after Patrice disappeared, moved to Phoenix, Arizona. Kimura noted the move. He flagged it. He kept a file, but without a body, without physical evidence connecting any individual to Patrice's disappearance. without a single witness who could place anyone with her after she left the hospital parking lot at 3:15 a.m. The investigation stalled, officially open, practically still. Gloria Delgado sat in Kimura's office in January 2002 and asked him directly, "Do you think my daughter is alive?" He looked at her for a long moment before he answered. He said he didn't know. He said they were still working every lead they had. She looked back at him and said, "I know she's not. I know it in the way that mothers know. I just need someone to say it out loud." No one said it for a very long time. The years have a way of burying things, even when the people who love them refuse to let them stay buried. By 2004, 3 years had passed. Maya Delgado was 11 years old and living with her grandmother full-time. She was quiet and careful and did not talk about her mother at school, though her teachers knew, because teachers in small towns always know. Gloria had converted Patrice's bedroom into something between a shrine and a waiting room. The bed still made. The nursing textbook still stacked on the nightstand. The framed photo of Maya's first day of kindergarten still on the dresser. Not frozen, just held. Detective Kimura had been promoted to sergeant by 2006, but he never closed his personal file on the case. He kept a copy in a banker's box in the spare room of his house on Pyramid Way, the original case summary, the photo arrays, the cell tower records, the pages of his own handwritten notes from those first frantic weeks. His wife knew about the box. She didn't ask him to move it. By 2008, the reward poster that a local business association had printed and distributed across Washoe County had faded to near illegibility in the windows of the few shops that still displayed it. A diner on Victorian Avenue kept one taped inside the front window for years. The paper yellowed, Patrice's photograph bleached pale by the sun. Nobody took it down. Somehow, that felt important. Nobody took it down. Maya turned 18 in 2011 and asked her grandmother to take her to the stretch of the Truckee River where they had searched. She stood at the water for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "She would have hated for me to miss my whole life waiting. So I won't. But I'm not stopping either." Gloria held her granddaughter's hand and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. Carl Weatherby, in Phoenix, was arrested in 2009 on unrelated charges, a domestic violence incident that was ultimately dismissed. Kimura, now retired from the Sparks PD but still, in the quiet and unofficial way of men who cannot let things go, monitoring the case, saw the report. He made a call to the Phoenix Police Department. He asked them to note the Delgado connection in Weatherby's file. He was told it had been noted. It had not been noted. By 2015, 14 years had passed. The case was cold in every practical sense. A new generation of detectives at the Sparks PD knew the name only from the file number. The evidence that had been collected in 2001, swabs, fibers, the cell phone records, a partial shoe print lifted from the driveway near Patrice's car, sat in climate-controlled storage, cataloged and untouched. Waiting, in the way evidence waits, for a question it hadn't been asked yet. Then, in September 2019, Carl Weatherby was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer at a medical facility in Tucson, Arizona. And something in him, after 18 years, cracked open. Every case on this channel is built from weeks of research, original case files, court records, family interviews, and documented investigative history. If this work matters to you, take a second to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It means more than you know. Now, let's get back to Patrice. The letter reached the Washoe County Sheriff's Office because Weatherby, in writing it, had the presence of mind to send it to the right place, Not to Sparks PD, where the case had originated, and where, perhaps, he feared it would get lost. To the county. To the cold case unit that had been formalized just 3 years earlier with a single full-time detective, Carla Reyes. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten in a sloping print that crowded the lines. In it, Weatherby stated, without extensive qualification, that he had encountered Patrice Delgado in her driveway in the early morning hours of October 15, 2001. That he had followed her home from the hospital. That what began as a confrontation, over what exactly he did not fully explain, had ended in her death. That he had transported her body in the bed of his pickup truck, covered with a canvas tarp, to a stretch of undeveloped land approximately 19 miles northeast of Sparks, near a dry wash he described in enough geographic detail to be meaningful. That he had buried her there. That he had taken her cell phone and thrown it from the Truckee River Bridge on his way back. The letter was not an apology, exactly. It was something stranger than that. It read, in Detective Reyes's later description, like a man trying to put down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what his arms felt like without it. There was no moment of moral transformation. There was no claim of remorse. There was simply, here is what happened. Here is where she is. I am dying, and I cannot take this with me. Reyes contacted the Sparks PD, the Washoe County DA's office, and the Nevada Department of Corrections within 2 hours of receiving the letter. She also, before doing any of that, called the number she found in the original case file for a Gloria Delgado on Oleander Drive. Gloria answered on the second ring. What followed was a sequence of events that moved faster than most people expected from a case that had been still for 18 years. Within 48 hours of receiving the letter, a joint forensic team from Washoe County and the Nevada Division of Investigations located the dry wash Weatherby had described. The land was scrub and hardpan, unremarkable to look at, the kind of terrain that stretches for miles in the high desert without variation. They brought ground-penetrating radar. They brought cadaver-trained dogs. They worked for 2 days. On the second afternoon, at approximately 3:40 p.m., in a depression 16 inches below the surface of a dry arroyo, they found Patrice Delgado. She was identified through dental records within 24 hours. She was 49 miles from the house on Oleander Drive. The house with the garden she had been losing a battle with. The house where her daughter's backpack still hung by the door the morning she did not come home. Carl Weatherby was transported from the Tucson Medical Facility to Washoe County in a process that took 11 days due to his medical condition. He waived extradition. He arrived in a wheelchair. He was formally charged with first-degree murder on a Thursday morning in October 2019, 18 years and 5 days after Patrice Delgado disappeared. There is surveillance footage from the Washoe County Courthouse lobby from that morning. Weatherby in the wheelchair, small and gray, being guided past a group of people who had gathered near the entrance. Gloria Delgado was among them. She is 72 years old in that footage. She is standing very straight. She watches Carl Weatherby cross the lobby, and she says nothing, and she does not look away. The case file that Roy Kimura had kept in a banker's box in his spare room for 18 years, he brought it to Detective Reyes the same week. He was 60 years old and retired, and had driven 3 hours from the small town outside Elko, where he had moved with his wife after he left the department. He set the box on her desk without saying much. She thanked him. He said she deserved better a long time ago. Then he drove back. Carl Weatherby entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder in March 2020, weeks before the pandemic shut the courthouse down. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He died in custody 11 months later, in February 2021, from the cancer that had prompted his confession. He never appeared before a jury. He never faced the community he had deceived for 2 decades. In some ways, the legal process was almost anticlimactic, a quiet procedural ending to a crime that had made so much noise in so many people's lives for so long. But the confession itself was never anticlimactic. Because Weatherby had, in those 4 handwritten pages, said the thing that the community of Sparks had been waiting nearly 20 years to hear. Not an explanation. Not a justification. Just, I did this. Here is where she is. She was real, and she was there, and this is what happened. Maya Delgado was 26 years old when her mother's remains were found. She had grown up into someone who wore her grief quietly, the way people do when they've carried it long enough that it becomes part of the architecture of who they are, rather than a wound they're still actively tending. She had finished nursing school. She worked, as of 2019, at a pediatric clinic in Reno. The symmetry of that, daughter of a nurse, now a nurse herself, is the kind of thing that makes you understand how people carry love forward through losses that should, by every measure, have made love impossible. She gave a statement to local news in the days after her mother's identification. She said, "I always believed they would find her. Not because I thought the system would work or because I thought justice was guaranteed, but because my grandmother never stopped, and I learned from her that some things you don't stop for. You just don't stop." Gloria Delgado, at 72, received the call that her daughter had been found. She sat in the kitchen of the house on Oleander Drive, the same kitchen, the same table where the half-finished glass of water had sat on the morning Patrice didn't come home. And she said, to Detective Reyes on the other end of the phone, only, "Thank you for not forgetting her." As if that were the thing that mattered most. Not the arrest. Not the confession. Not the legal machinery now set in motion. That someone had kept her daughter's name in the light. The Sparks Police Department has since implemented changes to how cold case evidence is cataloged and cross-referenced with corrections databases in neighboring states. A direct result of the Delgado case and the 18-year gap that allowed Carl Weatherby to live freely across a state line. It is a small thing, as changes go, but it is a change. And somewhere in that fact is the possibility that another family does not have to wait 18 years. That another daughter does not grow up with an unanswered question where a mother should be. Patrice Delgado was 34 years old. She had a garden she was losing a battle with, and a daughter who was learning to read 2 grade levels ahead of her class, and a mother who would not, for any reason, let her name disappear. She double-checked her lock every time she left the house. She listened to classic country on the drive to work. She had a vacation planned for the spring, San Diego. She and her mother, the first real trip in years. She never got to take it. But her name is not buried in the high desert anymore. It is said out loud. It is here, in this story, where it belongs. What does it tell us that a confession arrived not because the system demanded it, but because a dying man finally could not live with what he had done? Does that constitute justice? Or only its shadow? How do we weigh 18 years of a family's grief against a legal process that lasted less than 12 months? And when you think about the detective who kept a box of files in his spare room for 2 decades, driving 3 hours just to hand it over, what does that say about what we owe each other, long after the official world has moved on? Justice found Patrice Delgado after 18 years. Stories like hers are why this work matters. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.